Hi and welcome to the open source video blog. My name is Anavi. I'm a software engineer and an open source enthusiast. I'm doing these live streams from time to time. In general, they're supposed to happen every month, but honestly, we've skipped pretty much the whole summer. And now I'm back with an edition for October 2021. This is a live stream, as I've mentioned. So if you have any questions, anything that you would like to share, please write in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on it and I'll try to answer if there are any questions that I can answer. And if you're just watching it, say hi. It will be highly appreciated. So first of all, why did I miss the months in the summer? Unfortunately, it was not because of a vacation. Quite the opposite. I had quite a lot of work. On the other hand, there were not so many news. So today it's 31st of October 2021. I think it's a high time to make an episode to summarize some of the news that I've shortlisted as interesting in the open source world, and specifically for me, because open source is something huge nowadays. There are so many things going on, and my work and interests are primarily focused on embedded devices, so most of the news that you're going to see here are for embedded devices. Probably the episode will be slightly more than half an hour because there are several topics that I would like to highlight, and because it's the last month of October, I've been told that this is time for Halloween. I received this gift, this pumpkin. So happy Halloween to anybody who's celebrating it. I know it's a huge thing in the United States, in the United Kingdom. In Bulgaria, it's something that's relatively new, but kids and teenagers are really keen on this celebrations out in the streets. I can easily find vampires, witches, and so on. So yeah, it seems that people here also like it. So if you're celebrating it, have fun. If you're celebrating, probably you're not watching YouTube, but instead having some good times with friends. But this live stream will appear as a recorded video afterwards on my YouTube channel, so you can have a look at it. Another thing that I would like to share, I'm experimenting in a new place. Hopefully this place is better than my old place, and over the time it will become more convenient for doing these type of live streams. Another thing to mention is that I'm doing this live stream not only because I'm an open source enthusiast, and not only to share open source news, but also because I'm trying to improve my skills using OBS for live streaming. And OBS is a free and open source tool. So yes, the open source video blog is streamed thanks to open source software, OBS. And if you are planning to do something like this, please use OBS and use open source. And Patrick says, nice pumpkin, happy Halloween. Happy Halloween, Patrick. I'm glad you like it. Actually, I got it as a present. It's not something that I did, but it's pretty cool. And probably tomorrow or day after that, I'll put some addressable LEDs inside because I think it's going to be a pretty interesting effect. I just didn't find enough time to do it today. So going back to the slides, which are hopefully the most interesting part of this live stream. It's October, so it's time for Oktoberfest. This is an event to celebrate open source, and it's organized by DigitalOcean, Intel, GitLab, GitHub, all these and some other companies. So the whole idea of this thing is that Oktoberfest encourages open source developers to contribute to open source projects which are participating in this contest by making, for example, GitHub pull requests, and upon success, they have to make 4 reasonable GitHub pull requests in order to qualify and to win goodies like a cool t-shirt or beer coasters as an open source enthusiast, I'm also contributing to some projects which are taking participation in Oktoberfest. I've already did my 4 GitHub pull requests. 1 is okay, 3 are still waiting to become matured. And actually today is the last chance to make a GitHub pull request or in GitLab this year as well, I think, and to take part in Oktoberfest. And I have one idea of what should I do for like kind of a 5th GitHub pull request. So pretty much after the end of this live stream, if I'm not too tired, I'm going to do it. And Patrick is asking, you have that pumpkin embedded single board computer? Okay, that's a good question actually. I'm thinking of putting a microcontroller in this pumpkin. So basically, what would be really cool is just to drill a hole on the back and to put addressable LED strip or even just an LED strip that can be controlled, for example, from Home Assistant. So this will convert this pumpkin into Internet of Things. I have one open source hardware device that I have designed called Anavi Miracle Controller, capable of controlling addressable LED strips such as VS2812B. So that's the plan, but I'm not sure I'll find enough time to do it. Obviously, I wasn't ready with this on time. Another thing is that today I participated in a half a marathon, so pretty much the whole day was covered by this. I'm in an awful shape, but somehow I managed to run 21 kilometers, and after that I was just resting, and it's night over here, and I just wanted to make this episode because it's the last day of October, and it's been a while since I made an edition of the open source video blog. I've promised you that the majority of the news will be about embedded devices and hardware, and that's true. But I wanted to share something about WordPress, because WordPress is probably the most popular free and open source blog and content management system out there. It started, I think, 15 years ago. Of course, it's written in PHP and works with MySQL and MariaDB, which makes it quite convenient for shared hosting plans. I know that nowadays everyone is kind of moving to containers, but shared hosting plans are quite good and affordable solutions. So there are so many things running on WordPress. I'm also using WordPress for some of my projects. It's good to share updates and some news about things that I do. So WordPress 5.8 is called The Tomb, and it was released in July this year. And speaking about releases, we'll move on with several GNU Linux distributions. First of all, let's talk about Ubuntu 2010. I'm pretty sure that anyone watching this open source video blog knows the name Ubuntu, but just in case, Ubuntu is a GNU Linux distribution which is based on Debian, and it is developed by a commercial company called Canonical. Ubuntu itself is free, and the majority of the packages in Ubuntu are also free. Of course, it contains some binary packages as well. Ubuntu has a biannual release cycle, which pretty much means that twice a year Ubuntu has a new release. I'm using Ubuntu on my laptop, the laptop that I'm using to do this stream right now, and the integrated camera on this laptop. That's why the video isn't perfect. So I'm using Ubuntu 20.4, which is a long-term supported version of Ubuntu. Back in the days when I was younger, I was trying to keep up to date and to always use the cutting edge version of Ubuntu. But after that, I've decided to stay with stable versions. However, if anyone is interested in experimenting with Ubuntu, give a try to version 21.10. Basically, Ubuntu is released in April and October, and since Ubuntu was released a few days ago, that's why the version is 21. This is obviously the year, and 10 is for the month, which is October. There is a code name for this version. which I have no idea how to read. I hope that it's pronounced something like Impish Indri. It was released in the middle of this month. It comes with GNOME 40 desktop and a snap version of Mozilla Firefox. There's no doubt that you're familiar with Mozilla Firefox, the second most popular web browser nowadays. And what's interesting is that this time Canonical is providing a snap version of Mozilla Firefox. Snap is a technology, it's an interesting technology that is being pushed by Canonical. Basically, it's a container which contains the application and all of its dependencies. This guarantees that the application will run using the desired way on any Linux distribution that supports snaps, because the application will come with all required dependencies. This is definitely very convenient for software developers and people working on quality assurance, because you can take the snap, test it, and since it contains all the dependencies inside, you'll be sure that it works well on another computer or another distribution. Very often there are sometimes well, not very often, but sometimes there are bugs where you develop an application which has a specific dependency. You are bringing your application to another computer which has a different setup and a different setup of installed packages. The dependency is there, but it's a different version, and as a result, your application might not be working as expected. This problem is solved by having these containerized snaps and providing applications as snaps. The disadvantage of using snaps is that they obviously increase the size. Instead of having, if you have several applications that are using the same dependency, if you are using these applications with snaps, this will mean that each of these applications will bring its own version of this dependency. That's the only thing that concerns me about snap. Maybe I'm not right about it, but yeah, it looks like that things like snap are the future anyway. Also, Ubuntu 21.10 brings support for using the latest NVIDIA proprietary driver with Wayland Session. And Wayland is an alternative display protocol. It's an alternative to X11. Wayland has been in development for quite some time, and actually I'm quite enthusiastic about Wayland, probably because it has been used by several embedded Linux distributions such as automotive grade Linux. Also, I think WebOS is using it, Tizen is using it, and actually my watch is Samsung watch. It's a relatively old watch nowadays, but it's with Tizen and it's with Wayland. Also, TVs like some modern smart TVs made by LG and Samsung are also using Wayland. And Wayland is now making its way to the desktop applications, to the Linux desktops. And if you have some applications which are using X11, which is I wouldn't say legacy, but yeah, the established display protocol for many decades. And if you want, and these applications are not tested on Wayland or don't use the native Wayland features, there is this port called X-Wayland, which provides compatibility for these old applications. Wayland is not something that's Ubuntu specific, not at all. It's used across various different Linux distributions. As I've already mentioned, it's being used in automotive grade Linux. Ubuntu 21.10 also has many additional improvements, but keep in mind that this is not long-term support version, and if you are not in a mood to do experiments, I would recommend you to do what I do and just wait for the next long-term support release. Every 2 years, Canonical is releasing LTS version of Ubuntu. The last LTS version was Ubuntu 20.4. It was released in April 2020, and in the next release cycle, in April 2022, Canonical is supposed to release a stable version of a long-term supported version of Ubuntu. Now let's talk about something else. Another operating system, again based on Debian, and it's called Armbian. Are you using Armbian? This is a GNU Linux distribution for single board computers. The advertisement is that other projects can trust to build upon it. Armbian provides stable releases 4 times a year, and in August, Armbian 21.08 was released. Again, it's the same naming convention, basically the year 2021 followed by the month, which is August. It's offering minimal server, XFCE, Cinnamon, and Bundy desktop with Linux kernel 5.10. Also, Armbian is providing a build system to customize your own image. It works on a variety of single board computers with ARM systems on a chip, including systems on a chip from OWinner, known as Sungsi devices, Rock chip. Also, I believe there's a version for Raspberry as well. There's a version for Solid Runs, Hummingboard, and Qbox I. So all these popular low-cost single board computers from China, such as Banana Pi, Orange Pi, are supported by Armbian. Also, they have support for the open source hardware devices manufactured by Olimex. Armbian is a great project. It's a truly open source project that I admire. And I have to say the maintainer and lead developer of Armbian, Igor, is a great person. Several years ago, he was here in my hometown, Bulgaria, on a local event that we had with our small open source community here. He presented Armbian, how Armbian works. If you have a single board computer that you would like to use with a Debian-based distribution, which is not a Raspberry Pi, most probably you are already familiar with Armbian because it's a great option exactly for this case. Have a look at it if you're not familiar with Armbian. I'm sure it will be convenient in many use cases, especially if you're using a Rock chip or OWinner devices. And I would like to share even more news about GNU Linux distributions based on Debian with different names. Are you familiar with Open Source Media Center, also known as OSMC? This is a free and open source distribution based on Debian, which provides Kodi as a media player. As a distribution, OSMC was founded in 2014. Currently, it supports 3 devices: Raspberry Pi, Vero, and Apple TV. In August, there was an update of OSMC which brought Kodi version 19 with codename Matrix. So Kodi was previously known as XBMC. This is a project with very long history, and it's an amazing open source project which helps you manage and play multimedia content such as video or music. I'm using Kodi with OSMC, but I'm using it on Raspberry Pi 3. And here comes the problem. Because Kodi 19 with codename Matrix supports H265 only on version 4 of Raspberry Pi. Previous versions of Kodi, and this happening because Raspberry Pi 4 version 4 has hardware support for this, for decoding this. Previous versions of Kodi were designed in a different way, which allowed to enable H265 on older Raspberry Pi versions and models. And at home, my setup with was and still is a Raspberry Pi 3 with OSMC with Kodi, and an external hard drive. It's pretty convenient. Last week I've updated it, and the result is that now I cannot play a bunch of content on my Raspberry Pi 3. The solution to this problem is either to replace the Raspberry Pi 3 with Raspberry Pi 4, which actually makes sense because this will significantly improve the speed and the quality, or alternatively to downgrade, but unfortunately it's not possible to easily downgrade OSMC to the older version of Kodi, which was Kodi 18 Leia. So eventually, if I want to keep the same hardware and keep running OSMC and Kodi, I would have to reinstall it. So keep in mind about this, and if you are running OSMC on an older version of Raspberry Pi, and honestly, probably it's not a good idea to update to the new version of OSMC that provides Kodi 19. And Patrick says that he's using LibreElec. Yeah, and LibreElec is an alternative version, alternative distribution that bundles Kodi and supports multiple devices, including Raspberry Pi. I have tried tried LibreElec on a Raspberry Pi. It works pretty well. The problem that I've described here about the support for the video decoding with H.265 is not actually caused by OSMC or LibreElec or OpenElec. It's rather a thing with the new release of Kodi, which means that most probably you get the same problem if you are running Kodi 19 with a different distribution on a Raspberry Pi 3, 2, or the very first Raspberry Pi. Just keep in mind that this is something that's that has changed in Kodi. And yeah, since we're moving on and the Raspberry Pi Foundation is releasing all these new devices, it makes sense to upgrade to Raspberry Pi 4. And now we're moving on again, and it's again news about open source project for single board computers, and I'm going to speak about Octo Project. This is a project that I'm very personally attached to, as you can see here on my hoodie. The Octo Project is an open source collaborative project of the Linux Foundation for creating custom GNU Linux distributions for embedded devices. It is using the Open Embedded build system, which provides BitBake and Open Embedded Core. Furthermore, the Octo Project also provides reference distributions, which is called Pocky. It's provided as metadata. There are no binary files. The idea of Pocky is that it helps you to bootstrap your own distribution for embedded devices and to build it from scratch. The Octo Project has a biannual release cycle. It's very similar actually to what I've explained about Ubuntu. The Octo Project has a release cycle that makes release in April and October, and also this is something new that happened in relatively recently. The Octo Project started to provide a long-term support release, which at the moment is called Dunfell. And this long-term support release covers 2-year period, just like what Canonical is doing with Ubuntu. And in October this month, the Octo Project version 3.4 with codename Honister was released. This happened this week actually, on Monday, on 25th of October. Honister is not a LTS version of the Octo Project, and the next long-term support release of the Octo Project will be in April. As an open source developer who's using the Octo Project in various projects for customers of the company that I work as an engineer, I'm also trying to contribute to various layers of the Octo Project, more specifically to Meta Open Embedded and Meta Python. The Octo Project has a steep learning curve, So this makes it a little bit hard for makers project, because basically with Yocto and Open Embedded you are building distribution from scratch, and this in most of the cases it takes some time. Obviously building a distribution from scratch is time consuming compared to downloading an Armbian image, for example, a Raspberry Pi OS image, and putting on your device. However, projects like the Octo Project and Open Embedded, or alternatives such as Buildroot, are very convenient for industrial projects where you need a very specific set of packages, and you need bigger flexibility to adjust things. To make your preferences, because if you take, for example, Ubuntu, it comes with systemd, and not all people like systemd. There's still people which prefer system 5, or also earlier with the new release of Ubuntu, I've mentioned about Wayland. Yes, there are a lot of individuals moving to Wayland, but there are also companies making products with graphical user interface based on X11, and they prefer to have a distribution still running X11. This is where the Octo Project and Open Embedded can help, because it provides all the tools to make a custom Linux distribution, especially for industrial projects. It's heavily used in automotive projects, also in medical products nowadays. Pretty much anything that you can think about it and requires Linux on an embedded device is suitable for the Octo project. And one more thing that's actually between the hardware and the software, it's called Matter. Matter was formerly known as Project Connected Home over IP chip. This is a proprietary, royalty-free home automation connectivity standard. The goal of the Matter project is to simplify development for manufacturers and increase compatibility for consumers. This is something that I've copy and paste from their website. So basically the idea here is that very big players such as Google, Amazon, IKEA, and many other companies are joining forces, and they try to make the Internet of Things that they manufacture, such as the speakers, the TVs, and so on, to make them compatible and easy to configure. This is an important project. As a user of IKEA smart lighting solutions, I have to say that it's amazing how difficult it is to control these devices and to connect them. It's totally amazing. IKEA is a big company. Okay, they're a furniture company, but these devices which work over ZigBee are a nightmare to connect and to use. It's and especially if I want to use them with voice commands from Amazon Alexa or Google Home devices. Hopefully Matter will improve this, and I have to say that it looks promising, at least at this early stage, because earlier this month there were some conferences, virtual conferences by Google, and there were a lot of topics about Matter, early preview for developers, and how you can integrate Matter with smartphone and eventually embedded devices. Matter isn't actually so new as a project. It was established 2 years ago in 2019. The source code of Matter is available in GitHub under Apache license, but the Matter specification itself is licensed by CSA. I'm going to keep an eye on this project, and hopefully it will be something that makes things easier, and most importantly, it will be even more open source than it is right now. At the moment, they are keeping the source code in GitHub under open source license, which is okay for me. And now we're moving on to topics about hardware, because October is not only about Oktoberfest, but also about the open source hardware month. The Open Source Hardware Association is a non-profit organization that advocates for open source hardware. This is as a legal entity. It's registered in the United States, and most of the board members are, I think, from the United States, but it's a worldwide organization which tries to increase the visibility about open source hardware, the understanding what open source hardware is, because open source hardware is not just sharing a PDF with schematics of the device. It's about sharing all the required schematics in order to reproduce the device under a license which allows people not only to reproduce it for their own personal use, but also to modify it and even to sell it. Also, the Open Source Hardware Association makes sure that the certified by them devices are not only open source hardware in terms of schematics, but also in terms of software that runs on this device, so it can have an entirely open source device. This is something that I'm really fascinated, I'm really passionate about, having this entirely open source devices from hardware to software. The Open Source Hardware Association is running a program for certification. It's a free program, so if you have designed an open source hardware, you can certify it for free by the Open Source Hardware Association. They could even help you with certain questions such as what kind of a license to pick and so on. October is the open source hardware month according to the Open Source Hardware Association, and the way to celebrate it is to certify a new open source hardware at their website, to become a member. I'm a member of the Open Source Hardware Association. There's a small fee, annual fee that you pay, you become a member and part of the community. And also, of course, where is it safe, they encourage people to host small events this month, or either local events or also virtual events that are also fine. So if you're not familiar with the Open Source Hardware Association, just Google about it and find more information about it. It's a great thing. Now, it's time to talk about hardware. And there are several hardware topics that we will cover. Most of them are open source hardware. Some of these open source hardware devices have been certified by the Open Source Hardware Association. We are starting with Olimex STM157 Olimexino Lime 2. Olimex is a company based in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. We are good friends and neighbors with them. They have amazing engineers and they're sharing a lot of experience. For several years, Olimex has been developing open source hardware devices. It's definitely more than a decade, so they're very, very experienced. In 7-8 years ago, they've released a very successful single board computer with all-winner system on a chip 810 and 820, which was called Lime. Now they are upgrading basically this line of devices with new system on a chip. This was a project in development for quite some time, and if you have watched previous editions of the open source hardware blog, you probably have seen me talking about this. This was released on Friday, and actually there are 4 variants of this board. The first 2 variants run out of stock pretty soon. They are available, and most probably next week I'll purchase one and have a review about it. STM157 is interesting in terms of a single board system on a chip, because this is the first device of this kind by ST which is capable of running Linux. There was 2 years ago I obtained development board, which is an evaluation board for STM MP1 series of single board computers and systems on a chip, but now we are seeing this type of single board computers by third-party companies, which are open source hardware. This is coming from Olimex. You can visit olimex.com to learn more and to order. The price starts at 46 euros. The other, I believe for the first two models, the other two models are 48 euros. This is excluding taxes and shipping. So depending on your location, there will be additional charges for obviously shipping it and for taxes such as VAT. Some of the devices that they are offering under this line are industrial grade, which means that they can work in a wide temperature range between minus 40 degrees and up to 85 degrees Celsius. We're here in Europe, so saying it in Celsius, I'm really awful at converting Celsius to Fahrenheit. So sorry about that, but I'm saying the temperatures in Celsius. These devices are running, the industrial devices are running on 650 megahertz. This is the CPU on these devices. The other devices with extended temperature range are between minus 20 degrees and up to 85 degrees. They are running on a higher speed of 800 megahertz, and there is a version with HDMI output, which actually is the version that I'm more interested about, because I'm looking at this single board computer from Olimex for hobby projects here at home as kind of an alternative for Raspberry Pi in my case. But I have to say that the majority of the customers of Olimex, as far as I know, are actually industrial companies, and they are using this in an industrial environment. So there is a extended temperature version with HDMI output. When the HDMI works, the operating temperature is commercial, as HDMI converter is not industrial grade. Visit olimex.com to learn more and to order. Keep in mind that this device is using pretty much the same form factor as the Line 2 devices that they have provided previously. The reason for this is probably, I guess, because they would like to use the same boxes. Those of you who are familiar with the embedded industry know that it's really hard to make a case if you are doing a low volume manufacturing. So if you have an industrial device that's you have manufactured a few hundred of these devices using, for example, this online version from Olimex, you would most probably would like to keep the same box. So this is an upgrade, keeping the same form factor. I'm not exactly sure, I have to double check, but I'm afraid that most probably this is not a micro USB, but mini USB. I'm not sure about this, I might be wrong. And the reason, and if this is a mini USB, the reason would be that the other line also has it. I know that the world is moving to USB-C. Most of the devices nowadays we are coming with USB-C. Our devices are obviously with micro USB, which was until a couple of years ago the most popular thing, and it's still super popular, but yeah, that's something that you should keep in mind. And you can power it from the barrel jack here, as it works, I believe, at 12 volts. Yeah, let me just double check to make sure that I'm providing you the right information. Yeah, so you can use the barrel jack to power it. I have to double check what is the voltage. Anyway, it's not that important. Go to olimex.com to learn more and to figure out all the details. They have good users manual about it. Oh, and we have there is a person from Oman. Good morning there. It's fantastic to see people all around the world watching this open source video blog. Welcome to the stream. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm really happy to hear that the content is interesting. Please let me know if you have any commands, recommendations for news that you would like to see in eventually future live streams of this open source video blog. Once again, I repeat, I'm doing this just for fun. I'm a software engineer, so I'm kind of out of the comfort zone when I'm doing this. This is part of the things, the selfish part of the things why I'm doing it, that I want to improve my presenting skills when I'm looking in front of the camera of my computer. As you can guess, I'm more used to speaking directly to people. And Patrick says, hi from Slovakia. Oh, hi from Slovakia. Slovakia is pretty much in the same, not exactly the same time zone, but I believe we have just 1 hour difference or maybe 2 hour difference from Bulgaria. So thank you for watching, guys. And hi from Plovdiv, Bulgaria. It's a late night here. And another hardware device that I would like to show you is Home Assistant Umber. So Home Assistant is a famous platform for home automation. It's an open source project written in Python that I have covered in many videos that I have published over the years on YouTube. It's an amazing project. If you're not familiar about it, have a look at it. You're gonna love it, especially if you are into single board computers, home automation, and open source. Now, Home Assistant started something new several months ago with the release of the so-called Home Assistant Blue. This was a cooperation between Home Assistant and the company behind Home Assistant, which is Nabucasa, with a company making the Odroid boards. And together they made Home Assistant Blue with a really nice blue case. This is why it's called Home Assistant Blue. This hardware was quickly sold out. It was sold out directly by the resellers of Odroid, and now Home Assistant is making the next step. They assembled a team and they designed their own hardware. This is a carrier board for the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4, also known as CM4. It integrates Silicon Labs chip for ZigBee module, which is compatible with Matter. The Matter is the new protocol that I've mentioned earlier in the open source video blog. There is a gigabit Ethernet, and there are optional power over Ethernet. The important thing is that this device is called Home Assistant Umber. I believe the name is Umber because of the cover of the printed circuit board on which you attach the Raspberry Pi Compute module. Home Assistant and the company behind Home Assistant, Nabucasa, decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign. And for this crowdfunding campaign, which recently ended and it was very successful, they decided to use CrowdSupply. CrowdSupply is a platform making crowdfunding campaigns which is focused on electronics and especially open electronics. The majority of the projects that are being crowdfunded at CrowdSupply are either certified by the Open Source Hardware Association or at least providing a lot of documentation. So Home Assistant did this amazing crowdfunding campaign. They funded it and raised more than $500,000 US. And this device is something that they will make in the coming months, and hopefully if they ship it on time, it's gonna be delivered to backers, I believe, in the middle of next year. Manufacturing hardware nowadays is quite difficult because of the global chip shortage, but I hope they'll do it in time. CrowdSupply is a great platform for crowdfunding. I'm using it as well. Home Assistant is a great open source software, and they have a great team of people. So although making hardware is something new for them, and this device is quite complex because it has quite a lot of features, I'm confident that they will be able to deliver it. Furthermore, it has a high quality stereo audio digital to analog converter. There is a real-time clock backed by a battery. This is the coin cell battery, and the enclosure dimensions are basically 12 centimeters by 12 centimeters with height a little bit less than 4 centimeters. And Patrick is asking if we can add links to these projects into the description. Yes, absolutely. Basically, the idea is that I would like to split the video once it's once the live stream is done into chapters. YouTube has this pretty cool feature. So when I know how much time I have talked about each of these slides, I'm gonna split it into chapters, and I'll list the number of links for these things. And definitely Home Assistant is something that I recommend you to have a look at, as well as if you're interested in having a hardware to run Home Assistant on to support this crowdfunding campaign. The campaign is over, but they're still accepting orders. And based on my knowledge how crowd supply works, I expect that even after they deliver, it will be possible to directly order. But this is going to happen in 2022. And the Home Assistant number looks amazing. Really something that I'm super excited about. Now moving on to something that's actually not open source, but it's really important, and this is Raspberry Pi 02W. So the name is a little bit long. I'm always super enthusiastic about Raspberry Pi. I know it's not open source hardware, probably it will never be, but there's so many open source software running on Raspberry Pi, and there's such an amazing community that I simply love Raspberry Pi. And the exciting thing is that they've released a new version of Raspberry Pi Zero. This is Raspberry Pi 02W. So the W at the end is for the wireless connectivity. 2 is because this is the second version, and it's 0 because it's using the same dimensions as the previous Raspberry Pi, which means is that 65 millimeters by 30 millimeters. It has the same connectors on the same places, which allows you to use your existing peripherals and cases. The official Raspberry Pi Zero case is suitable for this. There is a mini HDMI over here, 2 micro USBs. There is a connector for the camera, and also a place where to plug a micro SD card. The best thing about Raspberry Pi 02W is the price. The recommended price is just $15 US. Of course, this is a price that just recommended. It's almost impossible to find it for this price. First, because this is priced without shipping and without any taxes, and pretty much in most of the countries you have to pay taxes where you are buying something. In the US it's going to be a sales tax. Here in Europe we pay VAT, but the end price is, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be $15 US. However, Raspberry Pi Zero will be 02W will be available again at this amazing price. The interesting thing about it is that it's using the same Broadcom system on a chip which is used in Raspberry Pi 3, which means that this new Raspberry Pi Zero, which will be very powerful. The first version of the Raspberry Pi Zero was using the system on a chip of the first Raspberry Pi, which is quite old nowadays, but it's still useful. I have a bunch of Raspberry Pi Zeros here, and for certain specific small tasks, it's pretty cool. The interesting thing is that the Raspberry Pi Foundation did a special chip for this, because they've integrated the Broadcom system on a chip on the top of the die with 512 megabytes of DDR2 SD-RAM. This is how they've saved space in order to fit all these things on such a small board, which is pretty amazing. The system on a chip is manufactured by Broadcom. I have to say that actually I'm pretty convenient that you know this, but all systems on a chip on the Raspberry Pi is made by Broadcom, and considering the relationship between the Raspberry Pi Foundation, ARM, and Broadcom, I expect that this will remain valid in future with the new, obviously, new Raspberry Pi versions and models. Furthermore, earlier this year, the Raspberry Pi Foundation made an unexpected for me move, and they released the Raspberry Pi Pico, which is a single board computer. Sorry, it's a microcontroller, not a single board computer. Now they're back on the single board computer market with this new version of the Raspberry Pi 02W. Let me know if you have obtained it. I still haven't found a way how to easily purchase it here. It's not available at resellers. The first Raspberry Pi Zero was really hard to find because they were selling just one unit per customer. I've ordered a few of the Raspberry Pi Zeros from England, but this was back before. This was the first version of Raspberry Pi Zero. 0W, but this was before Brexit, so things were significantly easier to deliver back then. I've also bought, before the pandemic, I've also bought a few units directly from the Raspberry Pi shop that they're running in Cambridge. But now I'm not traveling that much. I haven't been in Cambridge recently, so I'll be looking for a way to buy this Raspberry Pi 02W online. And I hope that soon the reseller in my country will have it available. One more thing about open source hardware, it's something that I've designed. It's also available in crowd supply, just like the Home Assistant Amber campaign. Of course, it's a significantly more modest campaign. It's called Anavi Gardening Microhead, and it is a Raspberry Pi add-on. It has the same dimensions as a Raspberry Pi Zero, which means 65 by 30 millimeters. Basically, this is a head that you can put on top of the Raspberry Pi. It has slots for 2 capacitive soil moisture sensors and a built-in analog to digital converter from Microchip under the model MCP3002. I have already published a couple of videos first to explain how MCP3002 works and has to be connected over SPI to the headers of a Raspberry Pi, and another video to explain how these capacitive soil moisture sensors work with it. Furthermore, Anavi Gardening Microhead has a slot for a waterproof DS 18B20 temperature sensor. There are also a couple of slots for plug-and-play I2C sensors for example, for humidity, temperature, or light. There are UART pins for debugging and serial communication. There are extra GPIO I/O pins which you can customize for controlling irrigation systems. And last but not least, there is a green and a red indication LED. So basically this is an add-on board for Raspberry Pi, which is provided as with examples, and it's not a final product. It's rather a thing that I'm expecting people to use and to integrate in their do-it-yourself solutions for indoor gardening, and to have some fun, and also to take better care of their plants. I'm having some problem looking after the plants that I have, so that's why I decided to create this project. Initially, I created it 4 years ago with resistive sensors, but resistive sensors have a lot of disadvantages, so I hit the stop button. For 4 years, this project was kind of dead, and now I've revived it by using capacitive soil moisture sensors and an analog digital converter to read data from them, and hopefully this will help me look after my plants and other people with having the same problems. And earlier, while I was explaining about the slot for the waterproof temperature sensor, I've mentioned DS18B20. This is a sensor that works with one wire, and one wire is a bus for devices, which is actually it has been kind of invented by a company called Dallas Semiconductors. 20 years ago, another company called Maxim Integrated acquired Dow Semiconductors for $2.5 billion US. And now this year, Analog Devices acquired Maxim. In the hardware world, when there's a deal, this deal is about a lot of money, and I've heard, I'm not exactly sure what is the size of this deal between Analog Devices and Maxim Integrated. Basically, Maxim Integrated and Analog Devices are now one company. According to the rumors that I've seen, this will be the largest US deal for 2021, and it's estimated to be about $21 billion US. The aim is to strengthen the automotive and 5G chip making. As you know, right now we are in an unprecedented global chip shortage. So these moves between hardware companies are indication that they're trying to improve internally in order to be able to provide enough chips for the demand on the market. The main business of Maxim Integrated is to design, manufacture, and sell analog and mixed signal integrated circuits. Based on the information that I've seen in Wikipedia, last year Maxim Integrated had more than 7,000 employees. So it's both of these companies, and Analog Devices is obviously even larger company. Both of these companies are actually quite big, and this is a big deal. We'll see how things will go, but yeah, this is, just keep in mind that very often people are very enthusiastic about unicorns and startup unicorns about software, and they're speaking about these big deals about software companies. But when you have a company that's making something real, that's making hardware, sometimes these deals are totally groundbreaking. And I believe this is the case for Analog Devices and Maxim Integrated. Most probably you didn't read this in the headlines. It didn't make this acquisition didn't make headlines as, for example, the recent rebranding of Facebook to Meta, but it's something important for the industry. And also for open source hardware devices, because a lot of open source hardware devices are using components from Maxim Integrated and Analog Devices. It's been almost an hour. This is quite a long edition of the open source video blog, primarily because I've skipped several editions during the summer, and now there are so many news that I would like to share. So at the end, I would like to talk about upcoming open source events. I've shortlisted some interesting events. First, the Octo Project Summit, which is happening at the end of this month. It's going to be a virtual event, so you can register. There will be advanced topics, also tracks for beginners interested in the Octo Project. Earlier in this live stream, I've explained about the new release of the Octo Project and what the Octo Project does. I'm personally attached to the Octo Project. I'm using it on a daily basis. I'm expecting to have a presentation during the Octo Project Summit about software over the air updates with RAUC, and actually it's going to be a follow-up presentation. RAUC is an open source software for doing A/B updates, and a year ago I've ported RAUC to Raspberry Pi, and some other people ported it to new devices such as single board computers, such as for example Sunxi devices. So we'll briefly discuss this during the talk. There is also another, and the Octo Project is a project of the Linux Foundation, so this is a Linux Foundation kind of a Linux Foundation event. Our interesting event is about RISC-V Summit, which is happening in December, and this is going to be a live event. Yeah, the world is slowly coming back to live events, and the RISC Summit is supposed to take place in December, the beginning of December in San Francisco. RISC-V is an open architecture for CPUs. In the previous In the previous editions of the open source video blogs, we have talked about RISC-V devices. I'm really enthusiastic, and I hope that we will soon see affordable RISC-V devices and single board computers on the market. BeaGo 5 was supposed to be one of these devices. Unfortunately, I had access to a better unit of BeaGo 5, which I reviewed, but unfortunately the project was put on hold, and BeaGo Board Foundation is going to provide a new version hopefully next year. We'll see how this is going to work. Anyway, RISC-V Summit is happening in San Francisco. These are good news. The rest of the events are virtual. Automotive Linux Summit, again a Linux Foundation event in the middle of December, is going to be again virtual. And Fosdem. Fosdem is the largest open source event definitely in Europe, and honestly, if I have to bet, I would say it's in the world, but I'm not sure about it. Fosdem stands for Free Open Source Developers European Meeting. However, not only people from Europe go to it. The story about Fosdem is that it was established, I think, 21 years ago, and in general it always happens in Brussels, in a university there. It's an entirely free event. You don't buy tickets, you don't register, you just go there, visit the event, meet people. It's an amazing event. I've been 8 or 9 times there as an attendee, as a speaker. I love this event. It's totally amazing, because in this place you can see a lot of passionate about open source people, some of which are super experienced, other which are making their first steps in the industry. But all these people gather in one place and exchange ideas. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, last year Fosdem was a virtual event, and now they had plans to make it a physical event. Actually, in August, I've heard a connection problem. Okay, it looks like I had a temporary problem with the connection, but anyway, I'm back. I'm not sure if you missed something, but I was just talking about Fosdem. So Fosdem, unfortunately, again will be a virtual event. It's going to happen at the beginning of February. This is during the weekend. The call for papers for the different developer rooms will be soon available, and you can apply with your topics. And last but not least, have a look at the Pi Wars at Home event. This is a really cool event about making robots with Raspberry Pi. These are non-destructive robots which have different challenges. Pi Wars is going to happen next summer, and again, it's going to be a virtual event. Otherwise, before the pandemic, Pi Wars was happening in Cambridge, and this is the reason why I have been on a couple of occasions to Cambridge, and I had a really great time in 2019. And Patrick has this awesome comment that Fosdem is Christmas for Fos lovers. Absolutely, this is really good. Well done. It's something that I'm going to write down, and with your permission, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to use it. It's a very well said. Fosdem is an amazing event that we all love. So thank you very much for watching. It's been an hour. I was expecting to have this episode of the open source blog a little bit more than 30 minutes, and now it's a little bit more than an hour. So sorry if I was talking too much, and for a bit of a time there was a connection issue, but this is the curse of the demo and the live streaming. Thank you again for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next month. As I said, I'm doing this just for fun when I have time, so I'm not sure what kind of on which date will be the new open source video blog live streaming, but it's just something that I just have in mind. Please leave a comment once the live stream is done if there are certain news about free and open source software or hardware that you would like to see in the next episode. This would help me a lot, because I'm kind of doing a short list of the things that I think are interesting, and it's going to be great to see feedback from people and to see what you would like to hear about. And if you have an open source project and you would like to share it to the world, I'll be happy to help you. I'm not an influencer, so probably if I share it, not so many people will see it, but I'll be happy to do whatever I can. Thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for new videos and hopefully see you soon. See you. Bye bye.